It all started with a seemingly innocent link. "Click here for the scariest story you'll ever read," it promised. I should have known better, but curiosity got the best of me. Little did I know, that single click would unravel my entire reality. The story seemed normal at first, a typical creepypasta about a haunted video game. But as I read on, something felt off. The words began to shift on the screen, rearranging themselves into new sentences. I blinked hard, convinced it was just my tired eyes playing tricks on me. When I looked back, the entire screen was filled with one sentence, repeated over and over: "We see you, my name. We're coming." My blood ran cold. How did it know my name? I slammed the laptop shut and backed away, heart pounding. It was just a glitch, I told myself. Some sick hacker's idea of a prank. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. That night, I tossed and turned, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak of the house, every shadow in the corner, seemed menacing. When I finally drifted off, my dreams were plagued by twisted figures and garbled whispers. I woke with a start, drenched in sweat. The digital clock on my nightstand read 3:33 a.m. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized something was very, very wrong. The walls of my bedroom were covered in writing. Thousands of lines of text, scrawled in what looked horribly like blood, repeating the same phrase: "We're here." I scrambled out of bed, my feet slipping on paper. The floor was littered with pages, all covered in the same manic scribbles. This couldn't be real. I was still dreaming. I had to be. I pinched myself hard, willing myself to wake up. But the nightmare didn't end. A low chuckle emanated from the darkest corner of the room. "Oh, this is very real," a raspy voice said. "And it's only the beginning." I spun around, searching for the source of the voice. There, in the shadows, two glowing red eyes stared back at me. "Who are you?" I managed to choke out. "What do you want?" The eyes blinked, and suddenly the figure stepped into the dim light. It was me, or rather, a twisted version of myself. Its skin was pale and waxy, its smile too wide and filled with needle-sharp teeth. "We are the stories," it said, its voice a chorus of whispers. "The ones you read, the ones you imagine, the ones you fear. And now, we're free." I backed away, my mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. Stories weren't real. They couldn't be. The thing that wore my face grinned wider. "Oh, but we are." Every creepypasta, every urban legend, every nightmare, we've always been real. Waiting in the spaces between words, in the shadows of your imagination. And you, my dear reader, you've let us in. As it spoke, the walls began to ripple and shift. The written words peeled off, swirling around the room like a twisted tornado. I could hear screams and whispers within the maelstrom, fragments of 1,000 horror stories come to life. I ran. Out of the bedroom, down the hall, desperate to escape. But the house had changed. The corridor stretched on endlessly, doors lining both sides. I could hear things moving behind them, scratching and whispering. "You can't run from us," my doppelganger's voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere. "We're in your head now. Part of you." I kept running, my lungs burning. The hallway twisted and turned, defying the laws of physics. I wasn't in my house anymore. I wasn't sure I was even in the real world. Finally, I burst through a door and found myself back in my room. But it wasn't my room, not really. Everything was subtly wrong. The proportions were off, the colors too vivid. And covering every surface were more words, more stories. I sank to my knees, overwhelmed. "What's happening to me?" I whispered. "You're becoming one of us," the thing with my face said, materializing beside me. "A living story. Isn't it wonderful?" I shook my head, trying to deny the impossible. But I could feel it happening. Memories that weren't mine flooded my mind, experiences of 100 different characters, 1,000 different horrors. "Stop it!" I screamed. "I don't want this." The doppelganger laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "It's too late. The moment you clicked that link, you became part of the narrative. And the narrative never ends." As if to prove its point, the room began to change again. The walls melted away, revealing an infinite expanse of swirling chaos. I could see other scenes playing out, other stories, other victims. All trapped in their own personal hells. "Welcome to the library," my twisted reflection said, gesturing to the madness around us. Every story ever told, ever imagined, ever feared, they're all here. And now, so are you. I tried to run again, but there was nowhere to go. The floor beneath me vanished, and I was falling, tumbling through an endless void of words and images. As I fell, I caught glimpses of other narratives. A group of teenagers entering an abandoned asylum. A child answering a phone call from beyond the grave. A detective investigating a series of impossible murders. And in each scene, I saw myself. Sometimes as the victim, sometimes as the monster. Always trapped. Always suffering. "Do you understand now?" the chorus of voices that was my doppelganger whispered. "You're no longer just a reader. You're every character, every plot twist, every terrifying revelation. You're the story itself." I wanted to scream, to deny it all. But I could feel the truth of its words. My sense of self was fragmenting, splintering into 1,000 different narratives. I was the ghost haunting an old mansion. I was the ancient evil awakening from its slumber. I was the last survivor of a zombie apocalypse. I was the eldritch horror lurking beyond the stars. And through it all, I was still me, trapped in an endless cycle of terror, unable to escape. "Please," I begged, though I wasn't sure who I was begging to. "I want to go back. I want it to stop." The swirling chaos around me paused, and for a moment, I dared to hope. But then I heard laughter, not just my doppelgangers, but the laughter of countless entities, all taking pleasure in my suffering. "Don't you see?" the voices said. "This is what you wanted. To be part of the story. To experience true horror. And now you will, forever." The void began to shift again, resolving into a new scene. I found myself standing in front of a computer, staring at a web page with a single link. "Click here for the scariest story you'll ever read," it promised. My hand moved towards the mouse, compelled by a force I couldn't resist. I wanted to scream, to warn myself, but I was no longer in control. As my finger hovered over the button, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the screen. For a split second, I saw the twisted, monstrous version of myself grinning back at me. "The story never ends," it whispered. "It just begins again." I clicked the link. And somewhere, in the depths of the internet, in the darkest corners of imagination, another unsuspecting reader opened a seemingly innocent web page, ready to experience the scariest story they'd ever read. The cycle continued, the narratives expanded, and the library of horrors grew ever larger. Each new reader became another character, another plot thread in the ever-expanding tapestry of terror. And I was there for all of it. Watching, experiencing, suffering. Because once you become part of the story, there's no escape. The horrors you read about become the horrors you live. The monsters you fear become the monsters you are. In the end, there's only one truth: the story never truly ends. And neither does the terror. As I clicked the link once more, trapped in this endless cycle, something unexpected happened. The screen flickered, and instead of the usual creepypasta, a message appeared: "Do you want to break free?" My heart raced. Was this another trick, another layer of the nightmare? Or could it be a genuine chance at escape? With trembling fingers, I typed yes and hit enter. The screen went black, then erupted in a cascade of glowing green text. Lines of code scrolled by faster than I could read, interspersed with fragments of stories and distorted images. I felt a pulling sensation, as if my very essence was being drawn into the machine. When the sensation stopped, I found myself in a vast, dimly lit space. Towering bookshelves stretched in every direction, disappearing into shadows above. The air was thick with whispers and the rustle of pages. "Welcome to the Nexus," a voice said behind me. I spun around to see a figure shrouded in a hooded cloak, its face hidden in darkness. The crossroads of all stories. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice echoing in the cavernous space. The figure chuckled. "I've had many names. Narrator, author, muse. But you can call me the librarian." As it spoke, I noticed other figures moving among the shelves. Some looked human, others were monstrous creatures straight out of nightmares. All seemed to be searching for something. "What is this place?" I asked, unable to shake the feeling that I was being watched from every direction. "This is where all stories intersect," the librarian explained. "Every book ever written, every tale ever told, every nightmare ever dreamed, they all connect here. And you, my friend, have become a living conduit between worlds." I shook my head, overwhelmed. "I don't understand. How did this happen? How do I make it stop?" The librarian's hood tilted, as if considering. "You opened a door that was never meant to be opened. You became part of the narrative. And now, the only way out is to write your own ending." Before I could ask what that meant, a piercing scream cut through the whispers. One of the human-looking figures collapsed, clutching a book to their chest. As I watched in horror, their body began to warp and twist, transforming into a creature of shadow and teeth. "What's happening to them?" I gasped. "They lost their story," the librarian said solemnly. "Got too deep into another narrative and forgot their own. It happens sometimes." I backed away, suddenly acutely aware of the danger surrounding me. Every book, every shelf, could be a trap, a story waiting to consume me. How do I write my own ending? I asked desperately. "Please, I'll do anything to escape this nightmare." The librarian pointed to a distant corner of the library. "Find your book. The one that contains your true story. But be warned, the path won't be easy. The stories here, they're hungry." They'll try to pull you in, make you forget who you are. I nodded, steeling myself for what lay ahead. As I set off into the labyrinth of shelves, the librarian called out one last warning, and remember, don't trust everything you read. Even your own story might lie to you. The journey through the Nexus was a descent into madness. Each section of the library seemed to correspond to a different genre, a different flavor of terror. I passed through realms of gothic horror, where vampires and ghosts lurked in candlelit corridors. I traversed landscapes of cosmic dread, where incomprehensible entities whispered maddening truths. All the while, the books called to me. Their titles writhed on spines, promising answers, power, escape. More than once, I found myself reaching for a volume only to snatch my hand back at the last moment, remembering the librarian's warning. I lost track of time. It could have been hours or years that I wandered those endless shelves. My sense of self began to fray, memories mixing with story fragments until I wasn't sure what was real and what was fiction. Finally, in a dusty, forgotten corner, I found it. A thin, unremarkable volume with my name on the spine. With shaking hands, I pulled it from the shelf and opened it. The pages were blank. No, I whispered. This can't be right. Where's my story? Oh, but it is right, a familiar voice said. I turned to see my doppelganger, the twisted version of myself from the beginning of this nightmare. Your story hasn't been written yet. That's why you're here. It grinned, needle teeth glinting in the dim light. You see, every other book in this library? They're all finished stories. But you? You're still a work in progress. A living narrative, endlessly unfolding. I clutched the blank book to my chest, backing away. No. I refuse to accept that. I want my life back. My real life. The doppelganger laughed, the sound echoing off the shelves. But don't you see? This is your real life now. You're part of something greater than you ever were before. Why go back to that dull, ordinary existence when you can live 1,000 lives, experience 1,000,000 terrors? As it spoke, the shelves around us began to warp and twist. Books flew open, their pages swirling in a maelstrom of words and images. I saw flashes of my own face in 100 different scenarios, running from monsters, solving mysteries, confronting unspeakable horrors. Join us, my twisted reflection said, holding out a hand. Embrace the story. Become the author of your own nightmares. For a moment, I was tempted. The power to shape reality, to live out every dark fantasy, it was intoxicating. But then I remembered the figure I'd seen earlier, the one who'd lost themselves in another story. I couldn't let that happen to me. No, I said firmly, gripping my blank book tighter. I choose my own path. I write my own story. The doppelganger's grin faltered. You can't escape us. We're part of you now. Maybe, I admitted. But I decide how the story ends. With that, I opened the blank book and began to write. Words flowed from my pen, describing my journey, my fears, my determination to break free. As I wrote, the chaos around me began to calm. The swirling pages settled, the twisted shelves straightened. My doppelganger howled in rage, lunging for me. But as my pen touched the page, describing its defeat, it began to dissolve like mist and sunlight. I wrote feverishly, pouring every ounce of will into the words. I wrote about finding my way back to reality, about about closing the door between worlds. I wrote about healing, about moving forward, about finding peace. As I reached the final page, I felt a shift in the air. The oppressive atmosphere of the Nexus lifted, replaced by a sense of possibility. I looked up to see the librarian standing before me, nodding in approval. "You've done it," they said. "You've written your way out. But remember, the story is never truly over. It just enters a new chapter." Before I could respond, the world around me began to fade. The endless shelves, the swirling words, the librarian, all of it disappeared into a bright white light. I blinked and found myself back in my room. My real room, not the twisted version from the nightmare. The computer screen glowed softly, displaying a blank document. For a long moment, I sat there, unsure if I was truly free or if this was just another layer of the story. Then, slowly, I reached for the keyboard and began to type. It all started with a seemingly innocent link. As I recounted my experience, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. The terror wasn't gone. I knew now that the boundary between fiction and reality was thinner than I'd ever imagined. But I was no longer a passive victim of the story. I was its author. I don't know if I'll ever fully escape the influence of the Nexus. Sometimes, late at night, I catch glimpses of other worlds in my peripheral vision. I hear whispers of unwritten tales, feel the pull of narratives longing to be told. But now, I face these things on my own terms. I've learned to navigate the treacherous waters of imagination, to sail the seas of story without losing myself in the depths. And if, someday, you come across a link promising the scariest story you'll ever read, think carefully before you click. Because once you enter the world of living narratives, there's no telling where your story might lead. The cursor blinks at the end of my tale, waiting. In this moment of quiet, I can almost hear the rustle of pages, the murmur of countless stories unfolding. And I wonder, what chapter comes next?